partners, you're on the platform. We had the big fella riding to town earlier with our interview with old Winston Peters. So what if he needs a leg up to get on his horse? He's still riding proud in the saddle. Not my first rodeo either, Winston. I just felt like playing that music. It's such a great theme tune and such a great movie. Look, I went to the movies last night and I really want to talk about it. I'm going to be honest with you. I haven't seen Barbenheimer. I haven't seen Barbie. I haven't seen Oppenheimer. But my God, the mainstream media sucked on the tit of the entertainment industry in this country for months. The Barbie previews, that gushing woman, Kate Roger, who's got the most slappable face I've ever seen, going on about Barbie and going on about Oppenheimer and the gushy and the project and all the rest of the paid media. Because it was commercial and they were making money off it and they get paid to cover it, were telling us we all the must-see movies and global phenomenons. Rubbish, of course, all of it rubbish. But there is a movie you should see. No matter where you stand on vaxxers, if you are a New Zealander, if you are interested in our democracy, you must see River of Freedom. And River of Freedom is a documentary movie made by, I guess, a collective of movie makers and industry experts, many of them mandated out of their jobs during the time of COVID. And from what I can understand, it's a really neat story. It's very organic. A lot of them were following with these convoys that were going to Wellington for the protest. And they were all filming it. And they kind of met, from what I can understand, at the protest. And they had hundreds and hundreds of hours of footage. And they decided to make a documentary. And I don't think there's any coincidence that they've released it as the election campaign has started, because it is a political movie and it's a necessary movie. The only attempt to make a documentary about the parliamentary protests so far has been the government-funded, New Zealand On Air funded, Paula Penfold, piece of rubbish called Fire and Fury, which I think won some woke awards. It was basically state propaganda. It was an amazingly bad documentary that used digital enhancement to convey things that were not true or factual. It made, for the first time in New Zealand, the amazing leap that it would not deliberately not be balanced or seek counter views. And it was all about the pearl-clutching outrage of what we now call the lanyard classes, the middle classes, to the idea that a bunch of New Zealanders might think differently than them and want to have a say about it. It was roundly panned and condemned by anyone with half a brain. It featured people like the Disinformation Project making all sorts of weird claims. And it was pathetic. It really was. It was bad. It made me embarrassed to be a journalist. As did, to be honest, River of Freedom when I watched it last night. I'll just give you a quick synopsis. I still just recommend you see it. I think it should be compulsory viewing in schools. I think it should be taught in schools. It has no voiceover. So there isn't Paula Penfold saying, my friends who were drinking Chardonnay and I just thought this was outrageous. There was none of that. No voiceover whatsoever. Some interviews, though the questions taken out of the interviews, our mate Boise from the backbencher figures largely in it. Actually, they talk to him a lot. Marama Fox, the former leader of the Māori Party, makes an incredibly good contribution to the movie in an interview she does. But it takes all this footage from before the protest started, as it unrolls. There's a bit of emotive music in there if I was going to critique, but the pictures and the natural audio tell the story without you being, and of course the selection of those stories is going to be different. It is a movie that comes from an attitude, right? But it is still compelling viewing and important viewing. It is very well made. The soundtrack is excellent. It's nicely mixed. and very, very well edited. I was lucky enough to see, I took a friend along, and she's not, super into the movement, but she's someone involved in politics and stuff. She was interested in it. And I ended up sitting next by pure chance to Stephen Franks, former ACT MP and member of he's a member of the Free Speech Union, I'm pretty sure too. And smart guy, Stephen, lawyer. One of the people, along with Winston, who was actually trespassed by Trevor Mallard, or tried to prosecute him for actually visiting the protest. And a guy who knows politics. And we watched it together. That movie told me a couple of things. It was the mandates, not the vaccinations. And I will admit that my view of those protesters was coloured now that I look back at the mainstream media coverage that I was consuming. And they cut back throughout the movie to all the TV people and the journalists standing up on the Speaker's balcony at Parliament looking down on these troublemaking people. And they looked at Picton, where basically people were stopped at Picton from getting across to Wellington. And I thought back to the news coverage at the time, and boy, our media just took the government line. Parliamentary press gallery journalists were told if they went down and interviewed the protesters, they would lose their accreditation to the press gallery. That's what Mallard threatened them with. I've talked to Barry Soper about this. And they complied. They complied. And we never got the story that River of Freedom tells us. That there was, albeit a minority, but a significant number of New Zealanders who didn't ride out the COVID restrictions and the lockdowns and watch their property prices go down and cook sourdough. There were a lot of New Zealanders, and I would make this observation, already living on the fringes or on the breadline of society, not particularly well-off New Zealanders, what Mike Moore would have called battlers. And for them, COVID wasn't a jolly good jape, oh, we'll just battle through, isn't this great, I love Cindy. COVID really damaged their lives and damaged their psyches. And oftentimes in ways it didn't have to, because we had a doctrinaire government. And they were peed off and they wanted to do something about it. So they got together and they went to the one place that is the right place in a democracy to say you are dissatisfied. They went to Parliament. They went to the home of our democracy. And I guess what the movie says is no one listened to them. They were treated with contempt. And I don't care if you're not into Hare Krishna munches or people are into crystals, they've all got a right. And their right to voice was denied. They were silenced and they were marginalised, not just by the government, but also by a compliant news media in the time of COVID. It was amazing watching the movie. They some very good, a very good sequence about all the push to get people vaccinated, and you put it together, and it was quite scary. And every time Jacinda Ardern appeared on screen, and the Embassy Theatre was packed, God, the anger that came from the crowd that I was watching with it was remarkable. Same for Ashley Bloomfield, my mate Michael Baker, Susie Wiles. There was visceral anger towards those people whenever they appeared on screen. I got to say, Winston didn't get a huge reaction when they showed pictures of him. But the anger was palpable, and the message from the movie was, you didn't listen to us. The movie documents, in a true documentary way, the end of the protest. I think it's a little hard, personally, on the police who ended up being the meat in that sandwich. But boy, what an absolute lack of political leadership was shown. Oh, Chris Hipkins gets booed roundly, was booed roundly when I watched the movie. And, you might think, these days, that protest is hardly mentioned by the respectable lamestream legacy media. They don't want it to have happened because they ignored it deliberately at the instructions of the government. But it did happen. And I came away from the screening last night and thinking, whether you agree with those people or not, That was a significant moment in New Zealand's history and has had a profound impact on the election we are having today. I think it is one of the major reasons that Labor is going to lose this election. When Winston gets back, I think his attendance is one of the major reasons he is going to get back into politics. And I would add this. There were attempts, and I know there were attempts by people to try and get some sort of meeting. But the government basically branded those people terrorists and said we won't negotiate with terrorists. That was how stupid what the government of the day did. Trevor Mallard was part of that. Jacinda Ardern was part of that. It was a really sad chapter in our history, and I want to commend all the people involved in making that movie, and there are many of them. You've done this country a service, and I reckon that movie, in time, will become a classic. A classic, true documentary snapshot of what was happening in our country at a crazy time. So I absolutely recommend you go online to riveroffreedom.com and find out where you can see it. It was totally crowdfunded by people, donors and people. None of your taxpayers' money was used in it. And it's I think it's worth watching. And I'd invite you to go and see it with an open mind. As I said, there are a few people there in the crowd maybe who gave me the odd shifty look and, we're all nutters, are we? You're allowed to be a nutter. And you're not actually. Anti-mandate was the clear thing that came out from the movie. And as it pointed out, the mandates and removal of people from their jobs, police in particular is highlighted, was illegal under our Bill of Rights. Our government acted illegally. And I think as time goes on, we will look back and say we were scared into some kind of submission. That doesn't mean all these people are right and there's nanotechnology and 9/11 was a conspiracy, but they had a right, and that right in a democracy, and that right was denied. So there you go. There's my rave. There's my promotion for the River of Freedom movie. And if you went to see it, I'd love to hear from you. Give me a ring. 0800 33 2283. Someone has just texted and said, you saw last night why Jacinda resigned. She knew what was coming and why, the great divider. And I tend to agree. And I think Stephen Franks and I both looked and said, yeah, she knew it. This is where it ended for Jacinda Ardern. Two tiers society and discrimination. That was the end of it.